it's still a very undervalued position, especially when you are looking at the guys who can catch the ball, at a high rate. You still look at like Travis Kelce right now, what his like average annual deal is, like getting paid $17 million. That's a low end wide receiver too right now.
We welcome back to the show our good friend Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team. Dan, how we doing?
Doing well. The off season, but it is absolutely not, because nothing stops. So
No,
we're doing well.
Especially like this year was extra weird, I feel like, for me / us in the DC market, because we are used to having a little bit of time to decompress. There was no decompression time. Like, you lost, you're sad about it. The Super Bowl happened, and now we're 2 weeks from the combine. And that is, look, they need to either win the Super Bowl or just, I need more time. We can't be the NFC Championship game. I've decided might be the worst time to lose, Dan, for me personally, which is clearly what matters here.
Yeah, I feel that. And definitely getting off the Super Bowl and going, you know what, I'm finally going to have some time to sleep. And then realizing that the combine is in 2 weeks, and that is not going to happen at all. So we're like about a month away from actually, getting some normal resting time during the week.
Yeah. Then free agency is going to be chaotic, and that returns us to your top 100 list. Before we get there, we were just talking about Zach Ertz, who I'm sure is on your list somewhere in the tight end class. And we had a conversation on the show yesterday where I definitely undervalued Ertz in terms of the money. I didn't realize just how much the tight end market had jumped the last couple of years, where Ertz, if you look at the current market, I was like, I don't know, he made $3 million last year, but he's coming off a year where he basically didn't play. And it was like, I don't know, $7 million somewhere in there. And you go look at the market, and it's like, no, this dude's probably a $9 or $10 million player. What do you make of the current tight end market? The fact that position is getting paid like it should, because tight ends are such weapons in the NFL, especially when deployed properly, and how Zach fits into that market specifically this year, and specifically for Washington.
Yeah, so I actually wrote about the tight end market leading up to the Super Bowl last year. And I am still of the opinion that the tight end market, while it's getting higher and these guys are getting paid more, it's still a very undervalued position, especially when you are looking at the guys who can catch the ball, at a high rate. You still look at like Travis Kelce right now, what his like average annual deal is, like getting paid $17 million. That's a low end wide receiver too right now. And when you are looking at, the peaks of these types of guys, they are outperforming, what that is going to be on the cap, and how much you would have to pay for a wide receiver to have that same type of receiving ability. So I think there is still an undervalued aspect of even paying top of the market tight ends. So Ertz is definitely going to be interesting, because one, this is not a great tight end class in free agency, but it is, at least from, what I've seen, I haven't completely, gotten into the draft class yet, but it does appear to be a very solid class of tight ends coming into the league. So considering that there is not a lot of tight ends in this free agency class, I think I have Zach Ertz as the number 2 tight end behind Juwan Johnson, just because Johnson is a little younger, but they're still pretty far down where that top 100 is. So I think Ertz, if you do believe, especially for a team like Washington, do believe he's going to have that type of value, especially in the middle of the field, even if you're paying him 9-10, which is around the top of the tight end market, that's still way below what you would be paying a wide receiver to have that same type of impact in the passing game.
Dan Pizzuta, 33rd team, with us here on the Hoffman Show. So interestingly enough, you've got Zach on your list at 63 overall as the second best tight end, and 2 spots later you have Dyami Brown. And just for reference here, what do you think that Dyami? I don't know how much you've done, so I'm putting you in a bad spot here. I apologize, and we can find another way to ask some similar question. But like, what is Dyami Brown worth on the open market in terms of dollars? And then we can compare that to the, let's say, $10 million that it might cost to keep Zach Ertz.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what Dyami is probably going to come in at, I am not sure exactly, but when you look at, Alan Lazard, like 2 years ago was getting $11 million per year, right? Darnell Mooney just got 13 last offseason. So you're probably putting Brown maybe around there. You're still putting that in a, maybe like 9 to 13 range for a receiver of his caliber, especially someone who, if he gets a little more playing time, has the ability to stretch the field on the outside. That is something that so many teams really need to be looking for. And I think that is going to be a value to a lot of teams on the open market. So you're probably looking at those guys, especially since Brown is a bit younger, going to be in around the same value in terms of the average, cap hit or at least the average salary. So you are probably paying about the same. Ertz is going to be a lot older, but when you have a team like, Washington, you are focusing a little more on, needing some of that production in the middle of the field. So that's where, you kind of have Ertz coming in as a potential value there when you are kind of potentially paying the same amount for those two players.
Yeah, for sure. And not to mention what Zach brought off the field, the comfort that he has with Jaden. And I think they'd love to bring Diami back, but if at $13 million a year, like it's a you got to play him a lot at that. And I don't know that that's the role that he actually is best in. Okay. What, as you look at the contour of this free agency class, like what are the positions that are really strong to you? And then what positions is there going to be a dogfight? Cause there's just not a lot of guys that are available.
Yeah, where the strongest pieces right now, if you are looking to, build a defense up the spine, the interior defensive line is pretty strong. You got two really good guys up the top there in Osa Digizu and Milton Williams. Linebacker is very deep, and safety, I think, is pretty deep, where at all three of those positions, you have some really good guys at the top. But if you're missing out at that top tier, you're still getting some pretty good players as you get further down. Edge, as we talked about, I think last week or whenever we were talking about Myles Garrett, I don't even remember when that trade request happened. Everything, kind of blends together. Edge is going to be that position where I think a lot of people are going to try to be looking at the top, look for that Josh Sweat. And if you miss out, it gets pretty shallow pretty quickly. And I think it's going to be kind of the same thing at wide receiver. I think every team wants to bring in T. Higgins. You have, a Chris Godwin who's going to come off an injury right below that. And then you have, Stephon Diggs and Amari Cooper. You're looking at some of these kind of older guys who have produced. You're still kind of hoping they have a little bit left in them. But after T. Higgins, it's a pretty, solid drop off between like what you can guarantee you're going to get. But that is going to be a place where I think teams definitely want to go out and get that top guy and might be kind of fighting. And I think T. Higgins, if he hits the market, doesn't stay in Cincinnati, is going to be getting a lot of money because of that.
How do you try to value Chris Godwin? And spoiler alert for folks, Dan values him a lot because he's got him third overall on this list. A guy that has always been the number 2 to Mike Evans by nature of Mike being the incumbent, like future Hall of Famer, but really was the driving point of that Tampa offense earlier this season until he has that really nasty injury. So between the injury and like kind of not knowing where that is, what kind of dollars do you think Godwin gets? And do you think that Tampa would be willing to pay that to even let him onto the market in the first place?
Yeah, I think Tampa is going to be tough just because of, who they do have currently paid and some of the cap constrictions that they have a little bit with, that Baker Mayfield deal. They can, restructure that a little bit, but the way they did that 3-year deal, his cap hit is going to jump from like $9 million that it was in 2024 to about, 39, I think, in 2025. So you have that big leap on that 3-year deal. You still have Mike Evans under contract. So there are a lot of things that are going. I think, Godwin's going to be, in that, low tier, and especially with how big the wide receiver market has jumped over the past couple of years, where you're looking at guys in that range easily over, $20 million. You're looking at a Jalen Waddle who's averaging, 28.25, Tyreek Hill at, over 30 years old is getting 30. So he's going to be at least, somewhere in that, 25 to, $30 million deal average per year range, and maybe even more a little bit because he is on the open market and there are going to be multiple teams going for him. And I think what kind of we've seen with these deals that have been at the top of the market now, pretty much all of them are extensions. So we haven't really seen a top tier free agent hit that. Like Calvin Ridley was the highest, and he got 23. And Chris Godwin right now, coming off the injury, is a better receiver than. Or Chris Godwin, coming off the injury, is a better receiver than Calvin Ridley was at this point last year when he signed, 4 years, $92 million. So Godwin's going to definitely surpass that, especially with it a year later and the cap still going up.
Dan Pizzuta, 33rd Team. His top 100 is out now at the 33rdteam.com. So last year, it was very clear there were certain guys that Washington was targeting, and they had a laser focus on, obviously, Bobby, and Zach was even a pre-free agency signing. So they had those two vets. But guys like Frankie Louvu, where they're like, this is the kind of player that we want. When you think of what currently makes a Washington Commander and you kind of go down your list, was there anybody that as you're making and stacking that 100 that you're like, that guy is a great fit in Washington?
I think we kind of talked about it a little bit last week or 2 weeks ago, where I think Ernest Jones is a really fun fit as a potential Bobby Wagner replacement at linebacker. And I think adding his ability to play the run in coverage, and you put a guy next to Frankie Louvu who makes the job of that guy playing next to him a lot easier too, because of just how aggressive he is playing downhill and just kind of with the range all over the place. I think that would be a very fun fit for this defense in free agency. Other than that, it's kind of tough to see because a lot of, the other places like, there's a bunch of safeties that I kind of, thought could help, like a Talanoa Hufanga. I think could be a very fun fit playing that kind of box safety type of role, but they have a lot of versatility to play there too. So I think like there are players like that who I think would kind of seamlessly fit into what Washington's doing on defense, and that's kind of where you think about some of these guys coming into Washington fitting this defense, just because they had so many 1-year deals there. So you do also have to plug some of those holes. So I think if you get like one of those top tier linebackers or safeties, that could go a long way in helping out this Washington defense.
Real quick on that front, Jeremy Chin, you have down, I think it's 75th. I've been scrolling up and down your article, so we're just going to somewhere in that's I think maybe it was 73. But you have him in that range. Where, like, how deep in the safety class is he? And do you think that Washington can get him? I don't want to say cheap, but like if they sign him on a multi-year deal, how much are they saving on a guy like Chin versus going after the higher end in Hufanga?
There's probably going to be a bit of a difference there. I have Jeremy Chin right now as, safety 8, it looks like. But again, with safety, it's a deep class where I think you're not going to go wrong with a lot of places. Like I have Justin Reed right now at safety 5. And he's really good and still really young as he's going into his third contract, coming over from Houston, going to Kansas City on a pretty decent deal, and then he's going to be hitting free agency again. And I think he's still only 28 or 29. So you have a lot of guys that I think in some ways will suppress the market a little bit, because we still haven't seen that safety explosion that I still think kind of should be coming in the same way that tight end happened. I think we've gotten some of the top of the market with like an Antoine Winfield Jr. when he got paid, and Derwin James. But other than that, we haven't completely seen this market really hit. So I think anywhere you go with safety, even if you are sitting at the top of the market, I still think you're getting a relative deal based on how much of an impact they have in the modern way defenses are played to, especially in, a Dan Quinn defense that's going to be very nickel heavy. But sometimes we'll use that, third safety to come down, play in the box a little bit. You want versatility there. So I think wherever you go on this, safety market, even if you're paying top of the market at the position, I think you're going to be getting a pretty good deal based on what they are going to bring to the defense.
So one of the guys that I've got circled for Washington to keep an eye on, and I know this might sound absurd at first, is Osa Odighizuwa because of the Dan Quinn connection. But I think they'll ultimately move on from John Allen because it just makes too much sense contractually to not And they drafted Jerzon Newton knowing that he's a probable eventual replacement for John or Duran. The way the contracts work, John is up first, and I could definitely see them with the production. He actually played well when he came back from the injury, but the way he played before and the way he's played the last couple of years, really, I could definitely see them moving on from him. So assuming that they are in that market, what do you think about Odighizuwa reuniting, and where do you have him on your defensive tackle rankings?
Yeah, I have him 10th right now, and I have him as the number one interior defensive lineman.
So 10th overall, first defensive tackle.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I have him above Milton Williams right now, and I know a lot of people have been watching the Eagles, saw kind of what Milton Williams was able to do as a pass rusher, but Osa Odighizuwa has been on the field more often, and is also, I think, just as good, if not better, of a pass rusher as Milton Williams has been on the inside. And I think he brings a little more in run defense too. So, and he's only about a little under a year older than Milton Williams. So I think if the Washington does want to do that, especially with the relative lack of edge rushers on the free agent market, like if you're not going older and getting a Khalil Mack or a Josh Sweat, which Josh Sweat is going to be paid a lot of money just based on who the edges are in free agency and what he was able to do, in this playoff run. So if you want to go interior, I think Osa Odighizuwa is a very good fit. Obviously does have the Dan Quinn connection, like you said. I think he's just as good, if not better, of a pass rusher as Milton Williams. Brings a little more in the run defense, can stay on the field, is a guy who is able to, play more snaps in there, doesn't have to be rotated out quite as much. So I would love that fit. And right now, yeah, he is my number one interior defensive lineman.
Quarterback market. Darnold is the one that I think is super interesting. Obviously, Rodgers looks like he'll be on the market as well. But how do you think teams value Sam Darnold? And I mean, obviously, there's the question of teams, including Minnesota. Do they bring him back for one more year to make sure that McCarthy is ready, or do they just roll with the guy they drafted in the top 15 last year? But Darnold getting outside the Kevin O'Connell bubble, what kind of value do you think teams are putting on him?
I mean, he's going to be valued highly just because, and I went through, had an article go up today about kind of looking at the quarterback landscape for every team. And there's just a chunk of teams right now who they don't know who their starter is going to be going into next season, or even just going into the offseason. And it's not only that Darnold is easily the number one option, but when you have a quarterback class coming into the draft where you have maybe, two first round guys who are going to be coming out, and no one is like super excited about those two first round guys. It's not even like if it was last year and it was only two, but it was still, Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. Like it's not a two in that way. And I think we probably had 5 or 6 guys last year who would have come out before the top 2 guys this year. So the fact that there are so few quarterback options, I think Sam Darnold is going to get a lot of money. I would be very hesitant to be doing that if I were a team who would be going out to pay him. I mean, I have him relatively high in the free agency rankings just because he is the number one quarterback, but he is not necessarily a guy I would feel good paying, especially because of those last 2 games that he had, kind of showing that it's still a little bit of the old Darnold. And I think Minnesota just had the most ideal circumstance for him throughout this season. And then it still wasn't, the best version of quarterback play that we've seen. So he's going to get a lot of attention just because there's a lot of need at that position. There are not a lot of players right now who are filling all of the holes that are at quarterback right now. Like the Giants right now do not have a quarterback on the roster. The Steelers only have Skylar Thompson on their roster. Like this is a league right now is desperate for a quarterback play, and Sam Darnold's going to be hitting free agency at the right time.
And there are not many good available, as you said, in the draft, in free agency. And then we'll see, does someone go crazy trying to trade for a guy like Matthew Stafford? Do the Rams just go, sorry, Matt, we're sending you to New York. We heard your brother-in-law is working there. Good luck. Last thing I want to ask you, Dan, kind of bringing the conversation full circle, because one other guy that you've mentioned a couple times, but he's a position of need for Washington, and he is an older player, is Khalil Mack. And so as we started talking about Ertz, we'll end talking about Mac. How do you value, now I don't say you value in terms of how you build your top 100 list. How do teams try to figure out the right number for a guy that they definitely don't want to give long-term money to? They need to pay enough that he picks them, but also you're kind of hedging your bets because you don't want to be the team that signs the guy who finally hits the age cliff.
Yeah, it's probably going to be one of those things where it is, either it's probably going to be like a short-term deal where you kind of either, have a lot of void years at the end where you're, stretching out some of the, guaranteed money that you're giving in there, either a 2-year deal with like 2 void years or something just to stretch it out, or you're, going a 1-year deal or a multi-year deal where there's not a lot of guaranteed money. I think there is a couple of different ways to do that. I think the raw numbers on a Khalil Mack deal, wherever he is going to sign, are probably going to look pretty big, but I think there are going to be a lot of ways for whichever team is signing him, where they're going to make sure that, if he does eventually, fall off an age cliff, he's still been a very productive pass rusher when he's been on the field. But I think they are going to figure out ways where they are not going to be really, built in and closed in on paying him a lot of guaranteed money. If that is something where, he isn't, if he falls off a cliff a little sooner than you would expect, signing him to a big free agent deal.
Dan Pizzuta writing about all of this and more at the 33rd Team. Dan, always appreciate your time, sir. And if we don't find an excuse to talk to you next week, I will definitely see you 2 weeks in Indianapolis.
All right. Sounds good. Appreciate it.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.